In a city that never sleeps, a woman running from her past comes face to face with a man who lives inside the darkness and discovers that the most dangerous place she could ever stand is exactly where she needs to be. This is a story about obsession, about power, about the terrifying line between protection and possession. If this story grips you from the very first scene, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because this is only the beginning. Well, the parking garage was the kind of place that made you aware of your own breathing. Evelyn Hart had worked late again, not because she had to, not entirely, but because the office was the one place in her life that still made sense. She knew where everything was there. She knew what was expected of her. She knew that when she closed a campaign brief and stacked it on her desk and turned off the desk lamp, she had done something real, something measurable, something that nobody could take from her by raising his voice, or throwing his keys against the wall, or standing in the doorway at 2 in the morning with that particular look on his face. She had been free of Travis Cole for 4 months, 3 weeks, and 6 days. She did not count the hours anymore. That felt like too much. The garage was on the 3rd sublevel of the Aldrich Tower building in downtown Creston, and at 12:17 in the morning it was the kind of empty that had texture to it. That particular hollow silence broken only by the distant hum of ventilation ducts and the sporadic flicker of a fluorescent tube 2 rows over that had been dying for weeks and nobody had replaced it. Her heels clicked against the concrete with a precision that she normally found satisfying. Tonight it felt like she was announcing herself. She had her keys already out. That was a habit she'd developed somewhere in the last year, though she couldn't remember exactly when. At some point she had simply started doing it, keys in hand, one finger looped through the ring, the metal edge of the car key pressed against her palm, ready. She told herself it was efficiency, getting to the car faster, not standing at the door fumbling. She was good at the stories she told herself. Her Audi was parked in its usual spot, space 47, in the row closest to the elevator bank. She always took the same spot when it was available. Travis had pointed that out once, that she was predictable, and she had laughed it off at the time. She wasn't laughing now. She was thinking about it as she walked, her breath even, her pace steady, her eyes moving across the concrete shadows with the quiet vigilance of a woman who had learned to read a room the way sailors read weather. She was 10 feet from the car when she heard it. The sound wasn't loud. That was what made it wrong. It wasn't the stumble of a stranger or the cough of someone heading to their vehicle at the end of a long night. It was a sound that had weight behind it, deliberate. Someone stepping out from the space between the concrete pillar and the black SUV parked 2 spots over from her Audi. Someone who had been standing very still for a very long time. Someone who already knew she was coming. She stopped, her keys pressed harder into her palm. Evie. The voice was low and wet and slightly slurred, and it moved through her like ice water through her veins, because she knew that voice better than she had ever wanted to know any voice in her life. She knew the way it softened before it hardened. She knew the cadence of it after 2 drinks versus after 6. She knew the particular quality it took on when Travis Cole had decided that the night was going to go a certain way, and nothing she said was going to change that. Travis stepped fully into the light. He looked worse than the last time she'd seen him, which had been across a conference table at the offices of her attorney where he'd sat with his own lawyer and signed the agreement that said he would leave her alone. He'd been clean-shaven that day, dressed carefully in a gray suit that she suspected he'd bought specifically for the occasion, his dark hair combed back the way he used to wear it when they first met. He'd looked like the version of himself he presented to the world, the version she'd fallen for. The version that had taken her years to understand was a performance. Tonight, there was none of that. His tie was loose and crooked. His jacket was open, untucked shirt visible beneath it, a dark stain near the collar that might have been wine or something worse. His eyes, brown, ordinarily unremarkable, the kind of eyes you forgot immediately after looking away, were lit up with something that she had learned to recognize as the worst version of him. Not anger exactly. Anger would have been simpler. This was more like a man who had been feeding something dark for weeks, and had finally arrived at the moment he'd been building toward. "What are you doing here?" she said. It was not a question. Her voice came out flatter than she expected, which surprised her because her heart was doing something violent inside her chest, and her hands had gone cold, and some part of her brain was already processing exits, the elevator she'd just come from, the stairwell 40 feet behind her, the exit ramp to her left that led up to street level. "I needed to see you," Travis said. "Travis?" She kept her voice level. That was important. He fed on emotion. She had learned that the hard way. You need to leave. Right now. You signed an agreement. I needed to see you, he said again, as if she hadn't spoken, as if the agreement and the lawyers and the 4 months and the 3 weeks and the 6 days were simply not part of the reality he was operating in. He took a step toward her. She took one back. Her shoulder blade met the concrete pillar behind her, and she stopped. And the specific quality of that moment, the pillar at her back, the car to her left blocking her sideways movement, Travis in front of her and slightly to the right, the distance between them now down to maybe 8 feet, registered in her body before it fully registered in her mind. The geometry of it, the way it had been arranged. He'd been here before she arrived. He'd waited. You look good, Travis said. His eyes moved over her in a way that made her want to step out of her own skin. You always look good when you're tired. You get this thing happening right here. He touched the corner of his own eye. These shadows. I always liked it. Stop. Why won't you just talk to me? His voice shifted. That familiar pivot from soft to something with an edge underneath it. That's all I'm asking. Just talk to me, like a human being. You've been treating me like I'm nothing for 4 months, Evie. 4 months. Like everything we had was just nothing. Everything we had was you putting your hands on me. Her voice cracked slightly on the last 2 words, and she hated herself for it, hated that even now, even 4 months out with lawyers and therapists, and a new apartment with a deadbolt she'd installed herself, her voice still cracked. That's what everything we had was. Something moved across Travis's face. Not shame. She had hoped, in the early months after leaving, that there was a version of him that contained something like shame, something that understood what he'd done and carried it. She had stopped hoping for that somewhere around month 2. What moved across his face now was closer to dismissal, the expression of a man who had told himself a story so many times that the story had become the only truth he recognized. You made me into that, he said. You know that. You know exactly what you did. The way you talk to me, the way you make me feel. I'm calling the police. She already had her phone in her other hand, had pulled it from her coat pocket with the hand that wasn't holding her keys, and she watched Travis's eyes track the motion and harden. Go ahead, he said, and he took another step forward. Go ahead and call them. By the time they get here what? The voice came from her left. Not loud, not raised. It arrived in the concrete stillness of the garage with the particular quality of a thing that has never needed to raise itself. A voice so accustomed to being the final word in any room that it had simply stopped performing the effort of volume. It was low and controlled and carried in it something that Evelyn could only describe later as the complete absence of doubt. She turned. A man stood beside a black luxury sedan 2 spaces to her left. A car she had noticed when she came in, sleek and expensive and somehow apart from the other vehicles. The way expensive things sometimes were, but that she had not registered as occupied. He was leaning against the rear quarter panel with his arms loosely crossed, one ankle over the other, wearing a dark suit that fit him the way expensive suits fit men who wore them as armor rather than costume. He was tall, with the kind of build that suggested not the gym exactly, but rather a lifetime of being someone who needed to be capable of things. Dark hair, cut short. A jaw that looked like it had met concrete before. Eyes that Evelyn could see clearly, even at this distance, because they were fixed on Travis with the particular precision of a man who had already assessed every variable in the room and finished his calculation. She had not heard him. She had not heard a door open or close, had not heard footsteps or movement. He had simply been there in the way that certain presences simply were. Travis had gone still. The drunk aggression that had been radiating off him like heat from asphalt shifted into something more complicated. His chin came up. His chest expanded slightly, that male recalibration happening in real time, processing whether to be territorial or cautious, running the numbers, the alcohol in his system throwing off the calculation. Mind your business, Travis said. The man did not respond immediately. He unfolded his arms. He pushed off the car with a slow, unhurried ease that somehow communicated more threat than any sudden movement could have. He walked forward 2 steps, into the full flood of the fluorescent overhead light, and stopped. He put his hands in his jacket pockets. She told you to leave, the man said. I don't know who you are. That's fine. A pause. You have about 30 seconds to decide whether you want to find out. Travis looked at him. Evelyn watched Travis look at him, watched the calculation happen, watched the drunk bravado flicker against something more fundamental, some older and more reliable part of Travis's brain that had been doing threat assessment since before he learned to talk. And she watched that older brain tell him something that the drunk bravado did not want to hear. "This is between me and her," Travis said, but there was less behind it now. The structure of his certainty was developing cracks. "No," the man said, "it isn't." Another pause. Somewhere in the ventilation ducts above them, something clicked and hummed, and the dying fluorescent tube 2 rows over flickered twice and went out. And in the slightly diminished light, the man's face was all planes and shadows and that unreadable stillness. "Walk away," he said to Travis. "Right now. Don't look at her. Don't speak to her. Walk to the exit and go somewhere else, and consider very carefully whether you want to find out what happens next time." Travis stood there for 4 seconds that felt much longer. Then he laughed. The ugly, brittle laugh of a man trying to recover dignity he'd already surrendered. And he said something under his breath that Evelyn couldn't fully make out, something with her name in it, something with a word she'd heard him use before that she would not repeat. And he buttoned his jacket, and he walked past both of them toward the exit ramp without looking back. His footsteps echoed up toward street level. And then there was only the hum of the ventilation and the buzz of the remaining fluorescent lights, and the sound of Evelyn's own breathing, which she had not been able to fully control for the last several minutes, and which she could hear now in the silence. So became aware that her back was still against the concrete pillar. She became aware of her hands, the phone in one, the keys in the other, both gripped too tightly. She made herself open her fingers, made herself breathe through her nose. The man had not moved toward her. He had not advanced. He stood where he had stopped, at a careful distance, and he was watching the exit ramp with an expression that was attentive rather than satisfied, as if he was not yet certain the problem had fully resolved itself. "He's gone," Evelyn said, because she needed to say something, because silence felt dangerous in a different way now. "For tonight," the man said. He turned his eyes to her then, and she understood in the first full second of meeting them that he was not going to offer her comfortable reassurances. There was no performance of warmth in his face. He looked at her the way someone looks at a situation rather than a person, assessing, cataloging, factoring her reaction into whatever calculation he was still running. "Are you hurt?" "No." She pushed off the pillar. Her legs were steadier than she expected. "I'm fine." He did not say good. He did not say, "Are you sure?" He looked at her once more, quick, complete, the kind of look that took everything in and filed it. And then he looked back toward the exit ramp. "You should get to your car," he said. "Lock the doors before you call anyone." "I wasn't—" She stopped, looked at her phone. She had dialed 911 before Travis had frozen. She hadn't pressed the last digit. She closed the phone and put it back in her pocket. She walked to her car. She got in. She locked the doors. Through the windshield, she watched the man walk back to the black sedan and open the rear door. Not the driver's door, the rear door, and that detail registered. And get in. And the sedan sat still for a moment, and then the headlights came on, and it moved toward the exit ramp with the particular unhurried quality that had characterized everything about the man inside it. She sat in the dark for 6 minutes before she started the engine. She counted. His name was Damien Viscari, and she learned it the way she learned most things, by asking questions that people didn't want to answer, and being persistent enough that eventually someone told her something real. It took her 3 days. She had written down the plate number of the black sedan before she left the garage. She wasn't sure why. Old habit, maybe. Something her father had told her once. Some piece of advice from a man who had spent 30 years in insurance adjusting and believed sincerely that the documentation of facts was the only reliable defense against the chaos of human behavior. She had written it on the back of a gas receipt she found in her center console, and she had put it in her purse, and she had tried not to think about it. She thought about it. On the first day, she told herself she was fine. She went to work. She presented the Korova Cosmetics pitch to a room full of account managers who were moderately impressed by the demographic modeling and decidedly unimpressed by the visual direction, which she agreed with and told them she would revise. And she scheduled 3 follow-up calls and ate lunch at her desk, and didn't check her phone for messages from Travis more than 6 times. On the second day, she called her attorney, a precise and expensive woman named Helena Park, who specialized in family law and domestic cases, and who had handled the restraining order with the kind of methodical efficiency that Evelyn had found both deeply comforting and vaguely terrifying. She told Helena about the garage. She watched Helena's expression, even over video call. shift through several states in rapid succession before settling into something controlled and professional and very focused. This is a violation, Helena said. Clear, documented. I didn't document it. You didn't? Helena paused. Evelyn, I know. Do you have any evidence at all? Security footage, a witness? She thought about the man in the black sedan. There was someone there, a bystander. She used the word deliberately because bystander felt safer than what she was actually thinking. I don't have his contact information. Helena told her to file a police report immediately, regardless, that the pattern of behavior was the documentation, that even a self-reported incident created a paper trail that would matter in any future proceeding. She also told her to consider whether she needed additional security measures on her apartment and her building access. And she said this in a tone that was careful and professional and utterly failed to conceal the fact that she was genuinely concerned. Evelyn filed the report. She updated her building's front desk about Travis. She changed her regular parking to a different garage 2 blocks from the Aldrich Tower, one that had better lighting and a 24-hour attendant. She still thought about the plate number. On the 3rd day, she called a contact she had, a journalist named Marcus Webb, who had done a profile of her agency 2 years ago and who had since become someone she traded favors with in the low-stakes way that people in adjacent industries sometimes did. Marcus knew things. More specifically, Marcus knew people who knew things, and he had the particular quality of someone who had spent enough years listening to other people's information that he had developed a genuine appreciation for the value of discretion. She gave him the plate number. She told him it was for a story she was working on. Vague, uninformative, the kind of non-explanation that worked between people who understood that the real explanation was none of your business. He called her back in 4 hours. That plate is registered to a corporate entity called Vascara Holdings, Marcus said, which is a holding company, which is registered to another holding company, which eventually traces back to a guy. He paused in the way that Marcus paused when he was deciding how much of something to say. His name is Damien Vescari. He's based in Creston. He runs legitimate business interests, real estate, logistics, some import-export. He's also... Another pause. He's also someone that people who cover organized crime in this city are very aware of, Evelyn. When you say you were researching a story... Oh, thank you, Marcus. Be careful. She put the phone down and sat with the name for a while. Damien Vescari. She typed it into a search engine and found very little. A few mentions in business filings, a brief appearance in a local news archive from years ago related to a real estate development in the Harbor District, a photograph from a charity gala that showed him in profile at the edge of the frame, dark suit, unsmiling, already turning away from the camera as if he had sensed it. She looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she closed the browser and went back to work. I was at the coffee shop on Whitmore Street at 7:15 in the morning, 4 days after the garage. She did not believe in coincidence. That was something else her father had told her, though he had meant it in a drier and more actuarial sense than she was applying it now. She came to the coffee shop every morning at approximately this time. It was 4 blocks from her apartment and had Wi-Fi and played music at a volume that allowed for thought. She had been coming here for 8 months. She had never seen Damien Vescari here before. I was seated at the corner table that she occasionally used herself, the one with the view of both the door and the side street. He had a black coffee in front of him, and he was reading something on his phone with the particular stillness that she was already learning to associate with him, that quality of being completely at rest in a way that had nothing passive about it. He looked up when she was 12 feet away. "Ms. Hart," he said. She stopped. Processed the fact that he knew her name. Processed the various implications of that. "You know who I am," she said. "I looked into the situation," he said, as if this were a perfectly normal explanation. He picked up his coffee. "After the garage, I wanted to make sure you were safe. By looking into my personal information, by understanding the context." He set the coffee down. "There's a difference." She stood there for a moment, weighing the impulse to leave against the impulse to ask the questions that had been building since that night in the garage. She had learned to be suspicious of her own impulses. She had also learned that refusing to engage with things that needed engaging with was how you ended up in bad situations that you could have seen coming. She went to the counter. She ordered her coffee. She brought it to his table and sat down across from him, because she had not survived the last several years of her life by backing down from things that needed to be faced. "How did you know my name?" she said. The situation required that I understand who was involved. He looked at her with the same direct quality she remembered from the garage, that complete absence of social deflection. Your name, your situation with your ex-boyfriend, the basics of what you were dealing with. I needed to know what I walked into. You were parked in that garage at midnight. Yes. That particular garage. That particular night. Yes. A pause. It wasn't planned, Ms. Hart. I was there for unrelated reasons. I saw something that required a response, and I responded. Unrelated reasons, she repeated. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite amusement, not exactly. The suggestion of it. I have people who use that building. It isn't unusual for me to be there. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. The warmth of it was grounding. You scared him, she said. Travis, he doesn't scare easily. Most men do, Damien said, when they're presented with the right context. What context did you present him with? The possibility of consequence, he said. Simply. As if this were obvious, as if the question had answered itself. She looked at him across the small table. He was more visible in daylight than he had been in the fluorescent shadows of the garage, and what was visible was not reassuring in any comfortable sense. The scar at his jaw, she could see it clearly now, was old, healed smooth, running from just below his left ear to a point below his cheekbone. There was another, smaller one above his right eyebrow. His hands around his own coffee cup were large and calloused in the specific ways that didn't come from office work. He looked like a man who had been made by difficult circumstances and had then made himself into something by deliberate effort, and the gap between those two processes had not been smooth. Who are you? She said. Not the name she had. Something else. Someone who understands what you've been dealing with, he said, and doesn't believe it should continue. That was not an answer. She recognized it as a deliberate non-answer, and she recognized that he recognized that she recognized it, and neither of them pretended otherwise, which was, in its own way, more honest than most of her recent conversations. My attorney says I need more documentation, she said. Your attorney is right. The police say there's limited enforcement when he hasn't technically done anything physical. The agreement he signed, paper doesn't stop people who've decided not to be stopped by paper. His voice carried no particular heat, just the same quality of settled certainty. You know that. She did know that. She had known it for months. She had been building documentation and filing reports and updating her security measures with the specific efficiency of someone who had been told that the process worked and who was trying to believe it because the alternative, that the process did not reliably work, that paper and law and documentation were contingent on a level of compliance that a man like Travis did not reliably offer, was something she was not yet ready to sit with fully. So what to stop people like him? She said. Damien was quiet for a moment. He looked at her with something that was not quite assessment this time, something more like recognition, as if he were seeing something in her that he had been waiting to confirm. The understanding that the cost of continuing is higher than the benefit, he said. When they fully believe that, not intellectually, in their bones, they stop. And how does someone arrive at that understanding? A pause. Different ways, Damien said, for different people. He picked up his coffee. She understood that this particular line of conversation had reached its natural end, that he had said what he was willing to say, and that pressing further would not produce more information. She had spent enough years in rooms with people who controlled the terms of disclosure to recognize the shape of it. She drank her coffee. He drank his. Outside on Whitmore Street, the morning traffic was building, the city assembling itself for another day, and the coffee shop filled gradually around them with commuters and students, and a woman with a stroller who parked near the window and spent 10 minutes rearranging things in a large bag while her baby watched the street. Travis called me 11 times yesterday, Evelyn said. Not to ask for anything, just to say it out loud to someone who already knew the situation. I didn't answer any of them. He left 4 voicemails. My attorney has copies. Good. He also sent flowers to my office. No note, just my name on the card. Damien's expression didn't change, but something in the quality of his stillness shifted, a subtle alteration in the air around him, the way pressure changes before weather. I'll need to know your office building, he said, if that's acceptable to you. She looked at him. Why? She said. Because I'd like to know the layout, he said, in case the situation at the garage repeats itself in a less private setting. She thought about that for a moment. She thought about the 11 phone calls and the 4 voicemails and the flowers with her name on the card. She thought about the sound of Travis's footsteps receding up the exit ramp, the sound of him walking away, the sound that she had replayed more than she wanted to admit, because it had been the first time in years that she had been in a confrontation with Travis, and the confrontation had ended with him walking away. She gave Damien the address of her office. He took out a phone, black, without a case, the same deliberate functionality as everything else about him, and typed it in. Then he looked up. "One more thing," he said. "What?" "The restraining order enforcement, the specific gaps in it. I'd like to understand those." He paused. "Not to circumvent them, to understand what they don't cover." She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about Marcus's careful pause. She thought about the words organized crime and what they contained and what they implied and what, sitting across from a man who was described by those words at 7:15 in the morning, drinking coffee, probably said about her judgment. She thought about the parking garage, about Travis's face in the fluorescent light, about the pillar at her back and the car blocking her sideways movement and the specific geometry of a trap she had walked into. She thought about the sound of a voice that had no need to raise itself. "I can send you a summary," she said, "from my attorney's documentation." He nodded. He reached inside his jacket and produced a card. Plain white, no logo, just a phone number in simple black type. She took it. Their fingers didn't touch. She noticed that he had been careful about that. The thing about rebuilding your life after something like Travis was that it looked, from the outside, like recovery. You went back to work. You ate regular meals. You slept, mostly. You went to therapy on Tuesday afternoons and said the things you needed to say and listened to the responses and noted them and tried to apply them. You called your sister on Sundays. You maintained the appearance of someone who was moving forward, because moving forward was the only direction available, and because the alternative, standing still and examining everything that had happened, was something your body had learned to resist with a ferocity that sometimes surprised you. Evelyn was good at appearing to move forward. She was not entirely sure how much of it was appearance. Her therapist, a calm and measured woman named Dr. Selena Roth, had been working with her since the month after she left Travis. She was the kind of therapist who didn't offer reassurances and who asked questions that were uncomfortable in their precision. She had said something to Evelyn in a session 3 weeks after the garage, something that had stayed with her. "You said you felt safe," Selena had said, "when the man intervened." "Yes." "Safer than you had felt in some time." "Yes." "And you've been thinking about him since." "I've been—" Evelyn had stopped, recalibrated. "I've been trying to understand the situation. Who he is, what his involvement was. That's reasonable due diligence." Selena had not said anything immediately. She had the habit of letting silences develop, letting them become specific, letting them say things that she didn't have to say herself. "I'm not saying it isn't," Selena said eventually. "I'm asking what you're feeling, not what you're reasoning. What she was feeling." Evelyn had sat with that question through the rest of the session and the drive home and the evening that followed and several evenings after that. What she was feeling was complicated in the specific way that things were complicated when you had spent several years learning that your own feelings were frequently unreliable, that what felt like love could be attachment, that what felt like comfort could be dependency, that what felt like safety could be the absence of one specific threat without any guarantee about others. She knew this. She knew it the way she knew the arguments for and against every decision she'd made in the last few years, with a specificity and rigor that was partly genuine wisdom and partly armor. And still, she had called the number on the card twice in the 2 weeks since the coffee shop. Once because Travis had appeared outside her gym at 6 in the morning, just standing across the street, not approaching, just standing there in the early morning gray, watching. And she had needed to tell someone who would respond with something more than another police report. The response had been immediate. She didn't know what happened after, but Travis wasn't there when she left. The second time she had called because she had found a note on her car, tucked under the windshield wiper in the new parking garage 2 blocks from the Aldrich Tower, the garage with the 24-hour attendant. The note had said, "I know you changed it. I know where you park now." Her hands had been shaking when she called. She had not told Damien they were shaking. She told him the facts, the location, the note, the time she'd found it. And she heard him ask 2 precise questions, and then hear him say that he would handle the parking situation, and she had wanted to ask what that meant, and she hadn't, because she was beginning to understand that some of the things Damien Viscari handled were better understood through their results than their methods. This was not, she recognized, an uncomplicated position to hold. She was holding it anyway because she was 4 months and 3 weeks and 22 days out of a relationship with a man who had made her feel afraid in her own home. And the fear had not stopped when she left, and the law had provided documentation and process and the slow accumulation of a paper trail that might someday matter in a courtroom, and none of that had stopped Travis from standing outside her gym at 6 in the morning watching. She thought about these things on a Wednesday evening 3 weeks after the coffee shop, standing in front of her apartment window with a glass of wine. She wasn't really drinking, watching the street below where a line of people waited outside a restaurant that she'd meant to try for months. Her phone rang. The number on the screen was not Travis's. It was not Damien's. It was a number she didn't recognize, local area code, and she answered it because she had learned not to let unknown numbers go to voicemail when your life had the particular shape that hers currently had. Ms. Hart. A woman's voice. Careful and professional. My name is Detective Mara Lindquist. I'm with the Creston Police Department, Special Victims Unit. I'm calling about an ongoing investigation related to Travis Cole. Would you be available to speak with me this week? Evelyn set down the wine glass. Yes, she said. Tell me when, Detective Lindquist told her. They scheduled for the following morning. Evelyn wrote it down and thanked her and ended the call and stood for a moment in the center of her apartment with the particular feeling of things beginning to move faster than the pace she'd set for them. She picked up her phone again. She dialed Damien's number. He answered on the second ring, which he always did. Evelyn, he said. Not Ms. Hart, she had told him 2 weeks ago, to stop with the Ms. Hart, and he had stopped, with the same simple compliance that characterized his responses to most of her requests, the kind of compliance that was not obedience so much as an assessment that the request was reasonable. The police called, she said. Special Victims Unit. They're investigating Travis. A pause. Short, but specific. They have evidence, he said. It wasn't a question. They didn't say what kind. They want to meet with me tomorrow. Another pause, different in quality from the first. She had begun to learn the difference between his pauses, the way you learn to read anyone you spent enough time listening to. All right, he said. Tell me what comes out of it. Damien. She hesitated. Then, is there something about this investigation that I should know before I go in tomorrow? The silence that followed was the longest he had given her in any of their conversations. The people I know and the things I do, he said finally, don't involve your situation directly. What the police know about Travis Cole, they know because Travis Cole has not been careful. Another pause. Go to your meeting, Evelyn. Tell the truth. You have nothing to worry about. She looked out at the street below. The restaurant line had mostly gone inside. The city was settling into its late evening rhythms, the particular texture of a Wednesday night, ordinary and unspectacular and full of people living lives that didn't include parking garage confrontations and unreturned voicemails and notes left on windshields. Okay, she said. Get some sleep, he said. Not unkindly, she almost smiled. You too. He said nothing to that. The line ended. She stood at the window a little longer. The street was quiet. She finished the wine she hadn't been drinking and rinsed the glass and went to bed and lay there in the dark, listening to the city outside her window, thinking about a detective named Mara Lindquist who had called at 8:30 in the evening, and a man who had said the police knew what they knew because Travis had not been careful. She was still thinking about that when she fell asleep. She was thinking about it when she woke up 4 hours later at 2 in the morning, pulled awake by her phone buzzing with a text from a number she didn't recognize. She looked at the screen. The message was 3 words. I see you. She was out of bed before she fully processed the words, moving to her window in the dark without turning on any lights, pressing herself to the wall beside the frame and looking down at the street at a sharp angle, the way someone had once shown her how to look out a window without being visible from below. The street was empty. She checked every angle she could see. The entry of the parking structure across the street, the doorway of the closed convenience store, the dark recess of the building entrance 2 doors down. Nothing. But the message was there on her screen. She read it again. I see you. The timestamp said 2:04 a.m. She looked at it and felt the specific cold that she had spent months trying to convince herself she was past. The cold that lived in the place where she had briefly been warm. She looked at the text again. New number. Unknown carrier. She screenshot it. She forwarded it to Helena Park with a message that said, "New number tonight, 2 a.m., see attached." She forwarded it to Detective Lindquist's number from the earlier call. Then she opened Damien's number. She stood there for 3 seconds. She pressed call. It rang once. "I saw it," he said. His voice was clear and awake, with no quality of having been sleeping. She registered that distantly. "Where are you in your apartment?" "Away from the windows," she said. "Good. Stay there." A brief pause, and in the background she could hear what might have been movement, the specific ambient sound of a space being navigated quickly and quietly. "I need you to... Damien." Her voice came out steadier than she felt, which was the habit of years. "What is happening?" A beat. "Travis Cole has been under surveillance," he said. "He's done something tonight that changes things." "What has he done?" Another pause, the kind that meant the answer was something he was deciding whether to give her. "What has he done?" she said again, and this time there was nothing steady about her voice at all. He told her, and the temperature of the night shifted into something colder than anything that had come before. He told her that Travis Cole had been outside her building, not on the street, not in the parking structure across the way, inside the building's service entrance, which accessed the stairwell that ran parallel to the residential floors, the entrance that was supposed to require a key card, and that apparently did not require a key card tonight because the overnight maintenance worker had propped it open with a rubber doorstop at 11:40 p.m. and had not returned to close it because the overnight maintenance worker had been dealing with a pipe issue in the basement and had forgotten. Travis had been on her floor, the 8th floor, standing in the hallway outside apartment 8C, which was her apartment, at some point between midnight and the time Damien's people said. And she absorbed those two words, Damien's people, and filed them in the place where she was storing all the things she was not yet ready to fully examine, had identified his presence and removed him from the building. Removed him. She did not ask what that meant. "I wasn't inside," Damien said. "He didn't have access to your unit. He was in the hall." "He was in my hall." She heard her own voice say it, flat, almost informational. "He was standing outside my door." "Yes." She sat down on the edge of her bed in the dark. Her apartment, which she had chosen partly for its security features and its doorman and its keycard access, which she had chosen because it was supposed to be the place where the outside stayed outside, felt like it had developed a new quality, a permeability she hadn't accounted for. "You had someone watching my building," she said. "Yes." "Without telling me." A pause. "I made a judgment call. Damien." She pressed her free hand flat against her knee, feeling the solid reality of her own leg, the warmth of it, the groundedness. "You need to understand something. I appreciate what you've done. I do. But you cannot make decisions about my safety without telling me. I spent years with someone who made decisions about my life without telling me. I cannot..." Her voice cracked slightly, and she stopped and breathed and continued. "I cannot be in a situation where things happen around me that I'm not informed of. I need to know, even the hard things, especially the hard things." The silence that followed was different from his other silences. It had a weight to it, a quality of something being received rather than processed. "You're right," he said. "No qualification, no explanation, just that." She breathed. "Tell me everything," she said. He told her. She did not sleep again that night. By 5:30 a.m. she was showered and dressed and sitting at her kitchen table with her third cup of coffee and a legal pad on which she had written down everything Damien had told her in the specific outline format she used when she needed to impose order on information that was threatening to overwhelm her. The pad had 3 columns: what she knew, what she needed to do, what she didn't yet understand. The third column was the longest. At 8 a.m., she met Detective Mara Lindquist at the Creston PD's Central Precinct on Hollis Avenue in a conference room that smelled like old coffee, an institutional carpet cleaner, and the specific accumulated staleness of too many difficult conversations. Lindquist was younger than Evelyn had expected, mid-30s maybe, with the kind of face that was both open and careful simultaneously, dark hair pulled back, a blazer over a plain shirt, a yellow legal pad of her own open on the table. There was a second detective in the room. He introduced himself as Detective Reese Calloway, older, heavyset, with the manner of a man who had heard every version of every story and was primarily interested in which version you were going to offer him today. "We appreciate you coming in," Lindquist said. "Tell me what you have on Travis," Evelyn said. Calloway's eyebrows went up slightly. Lindquist's expression didn't change. We'd like to start by getting your account, Calloway began. I filed 3 police reports and a detailed supplemental with your special victims unit in the last 6 weeks, Evelyn said. You have my account. What I don't have is yours. If you're investigating Travis Cole, I want to know what you found. Calloway looked at Lindquist. Lindquist looked at Evelyn. There are other complainants, Lindquist said. You're not the only woman who has filed against him. The room went quiet. Evelyn absorbed that. She had suspected it. Had suspected it in the dull, factual way that you suspected things you didn't want to be true. But hearing it confirmed in a conference room at 8 in the morning with fluorescent lights overhead had a different texture than suspicion. How many? She said. 2 others that we've identified, possibly a third. Lindquist's voice was even, professional, but her eyes were doing something careful. 1 prior to your relationship with him. 1 overlapping. Overlapping. The word sat there between them. He was seeing someone else while we were together, Evelyn said. We believe so, yes. She looked at the legal pad in front of Lindquist. She looked at the blank wall behind Calloway. She looked at her own hands on the conference table, the nails she'd had done last weekend in a pale neutral color because she had been trying to do normal things, maintenance of the ordinary, the small acts of self-preservation that accumulated into something like stability. What do you need from me? She said. They needed everything. They needed her timeline, her documentation, her attorney's files if Helena would release them, the voicemails, the texts, the note from the windshield, the incident at the gym, the incident at the parking garage. They needed all of it organized and attested, and she told them she would have everything to them within 48 hours, and she meant it, because whatever else was happening, whatever complications had accumulated in the last several weeks, a police investigation into Travis Cole was a thing she was going to support with every piece of evidence she possessed. She was at the door, coat in hand, when Calloway said, Ms. Hart. She turned. His eyes were steady and not unfriendly, but there was something specific in them. In the course of this investigation, we've come across some peripheral information about individuals who may have had contact with Cole recently. A pause. Do you know a man named Damien Vescari? She kept her face neutral with the particular effort that felt exactly like effort, like something she was doing with visible strain, and she hoped that it didn't show and that Calloway's particular eyes weren't reading the strain the way she suspected they might be. He intervened when Travis confronted me in a parking garage, she said, approximately 5 weeks ago. He's been, she chose her words carefully, aware of the situation since then, in a general sense. Calloway and Lindquist exchanged a look that was too fast to fully read. In what capacity is he aware? Calloway said. He offered to help ensure my safety, she said, given the limitations of the legal measures I'd already taken. Another exchanged look. Ms. Hart, Lindquist said, and her voice had shifted slightly, had taken on a careful quality. Damien Vescari is known to this department. I would encourage you to be thoughtful about the nature of your relationship with him. I appreciate that, Evelyn said. She left. She sat in her car in the precinct parking lot for 4 minutes. She called Damien. They know about you, she said when he answered. The detectives. They asked about you directly. A beat. What did you tell them? The truth. That you intervened in the garage and have been helping me with safety concerns since. That's fine. Is it? She gripped the steering wheel with one hand. Outside the lot, the morning traffic was thickening. Damien, they looked at each other when I said your name. That specific look. Like I'd said something they were already aware of and not entirely comfortable with. They're not going to investigate you, he said. You're a complainant in their case. They'll follow the evidence against Travis. What they know about me is separate. And what do they know about you? The pause. Things that don't involve you, he said. That's not Evelyn. His voice did not harden. It simply became more specific. You went to that meeting. You gave them your documentation. That's what matters. The rest of it, what they know, what they're interested in, that's noise around the actual situation, which is Travis Cole and what he's done and what the law is going to do about it. Focus on that. She breathed out through her nose. Don't manage me, she said. A beat. I'm not, he said. I'm giving you my actual assessment. It sounds like managing. Then tell me what you want me to say. The traffic outside moved. Someone 3 spaces over started their car. The ordinary texture of a Thursday morning, incomprehensibly normal. I want you to tell me things before I find them out from other people, she said. That's all. That's the only thing I'm asking for. Silence. Then, all right, she said, and ended the call. The following 11 days were the worst kind of waiting, not because nothing was happening. Things were happening constantly, the police investigation moving through its procedural stages, Helena Park working with the detectives on evidence sharing, the documentation of the windshield note being sent to a forensic handwriting specialist, the building management company of her apartment issuing a formal letter to Travis Cole citing trespass. Things were moving. The problem was that things moving in a legal investigation moved at the pace of an institution, which was the pace of something that had been designed to be thorough rather than fast. And thoroughness, when you were sleeping 6 hours a night and jumping at sounds in your hallway and checking your phone every 40 minutes, had a specific flavor. She and Damien met 4 more times during those 11 days. Twice at the coffee shop on Whitmore, once at a restaurant near her office building where he ate almost nothing and watched the room with the quiet, continuous attention of someone who had been trained to be aware of entrances. And once, this was the 4th time, a Tuesday evening, at the lobby of her building when he came to look at the service entrance that had been propped open. He walked the lobby and the stairwell and the service corridor with the focused, unhurried thoroughness of someone who did this professionally, asking the building's daytime supervisor questions that were specific and architectural, and that the supervisor answered with increasing nervousness as he began to understand the nature of the assessment. Evelyn watched Damien work and thought about what it said about her life that this felt, in a specific and undeniable way, like one of the more reassuring things she'd witnessed in recent memory. Afterward, they stood in the lobby while the supervisor went back to his office. He could have gotten to your door in under 4 minutes from that entrance, Damien said. I know. The door stopped. He said it without inflection, just the word, like the period at the end of a sentence. That was either careless or it wasn't. She looked at him. You think someone let him in? I think it's worth considering. He turned from looking at the stairwell door. His eyes were steady. Has Travis had contact with anyone in this building? An ex-tenant, a maintenance worker, anyone. She thought about it. I moved here after we separated. He's never been here. I chose it specifically because... She stopped. Because he didn't know it, Damien said. Yes. Then either he found it on his own or someone told him. He paused. How many people know your address? She thought about that harder than she expected to. Her sister, Helena Park, Dr. Selena Roth, Marcus Webb, possibly, though she hadn't given it to him directly. Her office, HR, for emergency records. The building management. Several people, actually, when she counted carefully. More than she'd been comfortable acknowledging. I'll make a list, she said. Do that. She looked at him for a moment. In the lobby lighting, he looked tired in a way she hadn't noticed before. Not dramatically, not the specific exhaustion of someone who hadn't slept, but the accumulated tiredness of someone who carried a sustained weight that did not set down. Do you sleep? She said. He looked at her. Something in his expression shifted slightly. Not surprise, but an adjacent quality. Some. That's not an answer. It's an honest one. She studied his face, the scar along his jaw, the smaller one above his eyebrow. She had been building a picture of him across these weeks, adding detail the way you added detail to something observed over time, rather than all at once. And the picture was becoming more specific in ways that were difficult to hold at arm's length. You lost someone, she said. She had not planned to say it. It arrived whole, a thing she'd been thinking since the first night and had been translating into more manageable forms. Someone to a situation like mine, that's why you... Yes, he said. No pause this time. The directness of someone who had been expecting the question and had decided not to deflect it. Who? She said softly. He looked at her for a long moment. Something crossed his face. Not pain exactly. Something older and more settled than fresh pain. The quality of grief that has been carried long enough to become part of the architecture. My sister, he said. Lena. A beat. She was 24. The lobby was quiet around them. The elevator hummed somewhere above. I'm sorry, she said. And she meant it in the specific way you meant things that no language was adequate to, fully, and knowing the inadequacy. He nodded once, the kind of nod that acknowledged receipt without asking for anything more. That's why you were in the garage that night, she said. Why you didn't keep walking? I told myself I would always stop, he said. When I saw it. I told myself a long time ago. He paused. I didn't stop in time for her, so I stop now, when I can. She had to look away from him for a moment. She looked at the lobby door, at the street beyond it, where the evening was gathering its pale gray light. How did she... She stopped herself. Her boyfriend, he said, flat. He had 3 years with her, built everything up slowly. By the time anyone understood what was happening, he stopped, started again. She called me the night it got critical. I was 4 hours away. I drove as fast as I could. Another pause, the longest one. I was 40 minutes too late. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the specific silence of two people who had come to understand something about each other simultaneously. She would have been 31 this past March, he said. Then, as if catching himself, I don't talk about her. I know, Evelyn said. Thank you for telling me anyway. He looked at her. His eyes, in the lobby light, were darker than she'd registered before. Not in color, but in depth. The look of someone who had assembled themselves from difficult material and knew it and had stopped either apologizing for it or explaining it. She found she could not entirely look away from him, and she found she was not trying to. You should go upstairs, he said. I know, she said. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then she went upstairs, and she stood in her apartment in the dark without turning on the lights for a while. And she told herself a careful story about appropriate professional appreciation for someone who had materially helped her in a crisis situation. She had stopped believing her own stories some time ago. The call came on a Thursday at 11:20 a.m., 13 days after the meeting with the detectives. She was in the middle of a client presentation, the revised Korova campaign, 3 months of work assembled into 40 slides, and a strategic rationale that she had rebuilt from the ground up after the first meeting's lukewarm response. She was mid-sentence, standing in front of a projection screen with a laser pointer in her hand, when her phone on the conference table lit up with Helena Park's name. She finished the sentence. She asked the room for 5 minutes. She took the call in the hallway. They have him, Helena said. There was a quality in her voice that Evelyn had never heard before. Controlled, but beneath the control, something that might have been relief or the cousin of it. A warrant was executed this morning. Travis Cole was arrested at 9:15 a.m. at his apartment. The charges are multiple counts of violating protective orders, criminal stalking, and a pause. An assault with intent. There is a third complainant we weren't previously aware of. Her situation was more severe. Evelyn stood in the hallway with the laser pointer still in her hand. He's in custody, she said. He's in custody. He was arraigned an hour ago. The public defender entered a not guilty plea. Bail is set high enough that Helena's voice did something careful. Given his financial situation, it's unlikely he can make it quickly. He'll likely remain in custody pending trial. Through the conference room glass wall, Evelyn could see the account managers waiting, the Korova slides frozen on the screen, the particular suspended quality of a room waiting for someone to return. She looked at her own reflection in the glass. Okay, she said. Evelyn, this is genuinely good news. This is the process working. I know, she said. I know it is. I just need... She breathed. Give me a moment. She had imagined this call in the abstract for months. She had imagined something definitive happening, some moment where the machinery of consequence finally engaged with the specific gravity of what Travis had done. And she had imagined feeling something clean and clear and identifiable in response to it. Relief. Vindication. Triumph of some kind. What she felt was more complicated than any of those. She felt something loosening that she hadn't fully known was clenched. Something in her chest, some sustained muscular tension that she had been maintaining without realizing it, beginning to let go. It did not feel like triumph. It felt like the first full breath after a very long time of not quite getting enough air. She thanked Helena. She told her she'd call back in an hour. She put the phone in her pocket and stood in the hallway for 30 seconds. Then she pushed open the conference room door and went back in and picked up exactly where she had left off, mid-sentence, because the campaign needed to launch, and the account managers needed to be convinced, and her life had always continued in exactly this way, presenting its practical demands regardless of what was happening underneath. She finished the presentation. She closed the room. She went to her office and closed the door and sat behind her desk and allowed herself for exactly 4 minutes to do nothing but breathe. Then she called Damien. Helena called, she said when he picked up. He was arrested this morning. A beat. Good, he said. Just that. The word arrived without ceremony or inflation, with the same quality as everything he said. Assessed, direct, accurate. How are you? He said. She considered the question. I don't entirely know yet, she said honestly. That's fair. I keep waiting to feel something specific, she said. Something clean. She paused. I feel like I've been carrying something very heavy for a long time, and it hasn't been put down yet. Like I know it's going to be put down, but my body hasn't figured that out. He didn't fill the silence with reassurances. She had come to appreciate that about him specifically, the absence of hollow comfort, the willingness to let things be what they were. Come to dinner, he said. She blinked. What? Tonight, if you want. A pause. Not as a situation to be managed, just dinner. She sat with the invitation for a moment. She thought about Dr. Selena Roth, an appropriate professional appreciation and the carefully maintained distance between the category of person who helps you and the category of person you let inside your actual life. She thought about his face in the lobby, telling her about Lena. She thought about 40 minutes too late. Okay, she said. The word was small, and it contained more than she was ready to examine, and she knew both of those things clearly. She said it anyway. She did not know, as she set down the phone and turned back to the afternoon's remaining work, that dinner would be the last quiet thing for a very long time. She did not know that in a holding cell on the other side of the city, Travis Cole was already on the phone with a man he had found through 3 degrees of remove, a man whose specific professional skill set Travis had spent the last 2 weeks, between the surveillance and the midnight texts and the night in the service corridor, trying to locate. She did not know what Travis had promised this man or what this man had agreed to deliver. She did not know that someone had been following her for 11 days and that it was not Travis. She found out 3 hours later, standing outside her office building in the early evening, when a man she had never seen before fell into step beside her on the sidewalk and said, quietly, and without looking at her, that she had 24 hours to end her involvement with Damian Viscari, or the people Travis Cole had hired would make sure her decisions affected people she loved rather than only herself. And then the man was gone, absorbed back into the sidewalk crowd with the practiced ease of someone who did this for a living, and Evelyn stood still on the pavement with people moving around her in every direction, her briefcase in her hand, the evening light cutting cold and flat between the buildings, and she understood with complete clarity that the situation had just changed its shape entirely. She did not move for 11 seconds. She counted them without meaning to. Then she called Damien. He answered before the first ring completed. Someone just approached me, she said. Her voice was low and even, and she was walking now, moving with the foot traffic because standing still felt suddenly wrong, felt like a target. Outside my building. A man I don't know. He said I have 24 hours to end my involvement with you. He said if I don't, the people Travis hired will go after people I care about. The silence on the line was 3 seconds long. It was the longest silence Damien had ever given her. Where are you right now? He said. On Collister Street, moving east. Keep moving. Don't stop walking. Describe the man. She described him. Medium height, 40, maybe 45. A gray coat, unremarkable. Brown hair going thin at the temples. A face that she was already struggling to reconstruct in specific detail because it had been designed, she thought, to be forgotten. The particular anonymity of someone who had spent time becoming unmemorable. I need you to go somewhere public, Damien said. Crowded. A restaurant. A lobby with foot traffic, not your apartment. Damien, Evelyn, listen to me right now. His voice had not raised. It had not hardened in the theatrical way of someone performing urgency. It had simply become more specific, more stripped down, every word carrying the weight of someone who was managing multiple calculations simultaneously and needed her to occupy exactly one of them reliably. The man who approached you was a message. That's all he was. You are not in immediate danger on that street, but I need you somewhere with people and cameras until I can get someone to you. Can you do that? She breathed through her nose. Yes. Tell me where you're going. She looked up. There's a hotel on Callister and 9th, the Meridian, big lobby. Go there. Sit where you can see the entrance. Text me when you're inside. She walked. The Meridian was 4 blocks and she covered them with her head up and her eyes moving, and her heart doing something sustained and percussive against her sternum that she was refusing to fully acknowledge, because acknowledging it would mean acknowledging the full scope of what had just happened, and the full scope of what had just happened was something she needed to process from a seated position with walls behind her. The hotel lobby was warm and overlit and full of the particular ambient noise of a mid-range business hotel in early evening. Rolling suitcases, a cluster of conference attendees with lanyards still around their necks, a bar area to the right where someone was laughing too loudly at something. She found a chair in a corner cluster of lobby seating with her back to the wall and a clear line of sight to the revolving door, and she sat down and texted Damien, "Inside, Meridian Lobby." His reply came in 40 seconds. "Someone will be there in 15 minutes. Don't leave with anyone you don't know. Order something." She ordered a club soda from a passing server and held it, and did not drink it, and watched the door. The man who arrived in 14 minutes was not Damien. He was younger, late 20s, compact, with the kind of stillness that she was beginning to recognize as a characteristic of people who worked in Damien's specific sphere. He sat down across from her without introducing himself and said, "Mr. Vescari will meet you at the address I'm going to give you. I'll take you there." "What's his address?" she said. The man looked at her. "It's a private location." "Then tell me what it is before I get in any car," he told her. She typed it into her phone, photographed it, and sent it to Helena Park with a message. "I'm going here tonight. Call me in 2 hours if you haven't heard from me." She showed the man the sent message without comment. He looked at it and looked at her and said, "Ready when you are." The address was a building in the Harbor District, old industrial architecture converted into something else. The kind of building that had been expensive to restore and showed it in the quality of the materials and the specificity of the lighting. A private elevator, a code she didn't see him enter because he blocked the panel with his body out of obvious habit, and then a floor that opened directly into a space that was large and spare and had floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the harbor, the water dark and lit from beneath by the reflections of the city. Damien was standing at those windows when she came in. He turned. He looked different than he had in the lobby of her building or the coffee shop on Whitmore. Not in any physical way. Same dark suit, same face, same quality of stillness. But the context was different, and context changed the nature of what you saw. This was his space. She understood that immediately. The space had the same quality he did. Nothing unnecessary, nothing performing comfort, everything where it was because it served a purpose. "Thank you for coming," he said, like she'd had a range of options. "Tell me what's happening," she said. She set her briefcase down. She did not take off her coat. He looked at her for a moment. His jaw was tight in a way she'd learned to read as him managing something internal that wasn't going to be shared without being asked for directly. "So Travis Cole made contact with people I have a history with," he said. "While he was building his case against you, he was also building something else. Looking for leverage. For anyone who might have an interest in making my life more complicated." A pause. "He found someone." "Who?" "A man named Carver. He runs collection and enforcement operations out of the East Side. We've had disputes over territory in the past. Nothing active in the last 2 years. He had reason enough to take Travis's offer without needing much convincing." She processed this. "Travis hired someone with a grudge against you." "He hired someone with a grudge against me to threaten the people around me," Damien said. The distinction was careful and specific. "The approach they took with you tonight, that's a pressure tactic. They're not going after you directly. They're trying to make you a liability. To you." "Yes." She stood in the middle of the room with the harbor visible behind him and the city's lights scattered across the water, and she thought about what it meant that Travis Cole, sitting in a holding cell on a stalking and assault charge, had managed to reach outside those walls and extend his disruption into a dimension she hadn't anticipated. "He's in custody," she said. "He's in a cell." "He has a phone," Damien said. "He has people who visit. Custody is inconvenient. It isn't containment." She felt something that was not quite anger and not quite fear, but occupied the space between them. A hot, specific frustration at the particular relentlessness of this. The way Travis seemed to exist outside the normal rules of consequence. The way that every measure she took and every legal process she engaged produced a result that he simply routed around. "What do we do?" she said. Damien looked at her steadily. "I handle Carver." "How?" "In the way that I handle things." "That is not—" She stopped, breathed. "I need more than that." He held her gaze. Carver's operation has vulnerabilities, financial, logistical. I have people who understand those vulnerabilities in detail. There are ways to make continuing this engagement significantly less appealing to him than walking away from it. That's what I'm going to do. She stood there and looked at him, and thought about Detective Lindquist's eyes when she said Damien's name. She thought about Calloway's particular pause. She thought about the conversation she'd been conducting with herself for weeks, about the nature of Damien Viscari, and what it meant that she was standing in his harbor apartment at 8 in the evening. Your sister, she said. He went very still. When you told me about her, Evelyn said, you told me you had been 4 hours away. You drove as fast as you could. She paused. You said you were 40 minutes too late. I've been thinking about that ever since. She paused again. What happened to the boyfriend? The silence was long and complete. He's not a factor anymore, Damien said. She looked at him. He looked back. Okay, she said quietly. She was not asking him to say more. She understood the shape of the answer, and she understood what it said about the shape of him, and she was making, in this moment, a decision that she had been approaching for weeks. A decision that she recognized as the kind that didn't have a clean, logical justification and that she was going to make anyway. She took off her coat. She sat down on the couch. Tell me about Carver, she said. Everything. How he operates. What his connection to Travis actually is. What you're going to do. All of it. He looked at her for a moment with that quality she had learned to read as him recalibrating, adjusting to a version of the situation he hadn't fully anticipated. Then he sat down across from her, and he told her. They talked for 2 hours, not just about Carver, about the specific geography of Damien's world. Not confessed exactly, not offered as disclosure, but assembled piece by piece through her questions and his answers, the way you assembled a picture from fragments when no one was going to hand you the whole thing. He was careful. He was honest within the bounds of what honesty cost him, which she was beginning to understand was a narrower range than it was for most people. He told her the operational structure of what he ran, the protection, the logistics, the enforcement of agreements that the legal system had no interest in. He told her about the men who worked for him, and the women, and the particular loyalty structure of a world built on demonstrated reliability rather than institutional rules. He did not romanticize it. That was what stayed with her most after. He spoke about what he did with the same flat specificity that she had used when she sat across from Calloway and Lindquist, and described what Travis had done to her. No performance, no apology, no inflation, just the thing, described accurately, in full knowledge that it was what it was. You're not going to tell me it's complicated, she said, sometime after 10 o'clock. It's not complicated, he said. It's a choice I made a long time ago. It served purposes that mattered to me. It costs things that I've decided are worth paying. A pause. I'm not asking you to respect it. I'm not sure what I'm doing, she said honestly. He looked at her. You could leave, he said. Right now. I have someone who can take you home, arrange additional building security, monitor the situation from a distance. You don't have to be here. She looked at him across the low table between them, at this man who carried old grief like structural steel, load-bearing, invisible, absolutely central, and who had walked into a parking garage and changed the direction of her life without either of them fully understanding that that was what was happening. I know I could leave, she said. He waited. She didn't move. Something shifted in his face. Not dramatically, not the visible melting that happened in stories, but the particular relaxation of attention that had been maintained a long time, a subtle settling. He reached across the table and his hand covered hers briefly, and then withdrew, and the contact was so contained and careful that it somehow said more than an extended gesture would have. I'll have someone outside your building, he said, all night. I know, she said. She left at 11. In the car on the way back across the city, she looked out at the harbor receding behind her and thought about choices and the specific irreversibility of them, and felt, underneath the fear and the exhaustion and the accumulated weight of weeks, something that was tentative and cautious and that she recognized despite herself. She was still feeling it at 6:50 the next morning when her phone rang with Helena Park's number. There's a development, Helena said. Her voice had the quality of someone who has processed information and has not yet decided how to present it. From the prosecution side, Detective Lindquist called me 20 minutes ago. What development? One of the other complainants, Helena said. The woman with the more severe situation. A pause. She's withdrawing her statement. She called the detective this morning and said she no longer wished to participate in the case. Evelyn sat up. Why? She said. She said she'd reconsidered, that she didn't believe it would serve her best interest to proceed. Another pause, more specific this time. Lindquist said the woman seemed frightened. She used that word, frightened. The cold that moved through Evelyn was different from the cold of the parking garage, or the cold of the midnight text, or the cold of the stranger on the sidewalk. This was the particular cold of understanding something that made the structure of a situation visible in a way it hadn't been before. Carver, she said. I don't know that name, Helena said carefully. Someone Travis is connected to. Someone who applies pressure. She got out of bed. She was moving already, pulling clothes from her closet with the phone pressed to her ear. Helena, if that complainant withdraws, what happens to the case? It weakens significantly. She was the most credible complainant in terms of documented physical. Helena stopped, started again. It doesn't collapse the case. The other evidence still stands. But the prosecution loses their strongest witness. A good defense attorney will use that withdrawal to cast doubt on the broader pattern. Evelyn stood in her bedroom holding a shirt she'd pulled from a hanger without looking at it. She thought about a woman she'd never met who had been in a situation more severe than hers, who had been frightened enough by whatever had been said to her to pick up the phone at 6:30 in the morning and call a detective and take back the words that might have finally meant something. She thought about Travis in his cell. She thought about 40 minutes too late. She called Damien. The third complainant is withdrawing her statement, she said when he answered. Someone got to her, frightened her into it. A beat that was different from any of his previous beats, harder, more specific. When? He said. This morning. She called Lindquist at 6. That's Carver moving fast, he said. Faster than I expected. A pause, and she heard movement in the background. Him already in motion, already rerouting. This changes the timetable. What does that mean? It means I need to move on Carver today, instead of this week. She gripped the phone. And if I do that, the pressure on your witnesses stops. Carver has no further incentive to maintain Travis's contract once the cost of maintaining it exceeds what Travis can offer. And if something goes wrong, she said, if it escalates, if Carver responds in a way that... Evelyn. His voice was even and specific and direct. I've been managing situations like this for 15 years. I don't move without understanding the variables. You said you didn't expect him to move this fast, she said. That's a variable you didn't understand. The silence that followed had a different texture than usual. She had landed something real, and they both knew it. Yes, he said, just that. She stood in her bedroom with the shirt still in her hand. Outside her window, the city was assembling its morning self, ordinary and indifferent, and full of people whose lives did not currently hinge on the decisions being made in this phone call. Tell me honestly, she said. Is my sister safe? Is she... She stopped. She had not mentioned her sister to him directly. The list she had made, the list of people who knew her address. Her sister Claire was on that list. Claire, who lived in the Westmount neighborhood with her husband and her 7-year-old, and who had no part in any of this except the part of being loved. If Carver wanted to make a point through someone I care about, I put someone on your sister's address 2 days ago, Damien said quietly. She stopped breathing for a moment. You what? 2 days ago when I assessed the full scope of Carver's involvement. I put someone on her address without telling you because I was trying to avoid alarming you before I had a complete picture. A pause. I know that's the same mistake I made with your building. I know what I said about telling you things before you found them out from other people. I'm telling you now. She sat down on the edge of her bed. The shirt fell from her hand. She put her palm flat against her own chest, felt her heart against it. Is she okay? She said. She's fine. She's completely unaware. My person is external. Surveillance only. Nothing has happened. Another pause. Nothing will happen to her, Evelyn. I'm telling you that directly. She sat there. She breathed. She thought about Claire making her 7-year-old's lunch in her kitchen in Westmount, completely unaware that the universe had tilted in this direction, that the specific thread of consequence running from a parking garage 5 weeks ago had extended itself all the way to her address. What do you need from me? She said. Stay in your building today. Work from home if you can. Don't go anywhere without... I have a client presentation at 2 p.m., she said. At their offices. I can't cancel it. I'll have someone with you, he said. Damien. She paused. I'm not going to live like a hostage while you resolve this. One day, he said. Give me one day. She looked at the window. The light had the quality of early morning, pale and without particular warmth, the light of a day that had not yet committed to anything. One day, she said. She went to the presentation. She nailed it. She came home to her apartment at 6:15 p.m. and found that Damien had sent her a text at 4:40. Carver's situation handled. His people have been stood down. Travis no longer has operational support outside the facility. She read it 3 times. She texted back, the withdrawn witness statement? The reply came in 2 minutes. Lindquist told Helena the woman called back, reinstated her statement, said she'd had a change of heart. She sat with her phone in her hand and thought about a change of heart and what it looked like when Damien Viscari engineered one. She thought about Calloway's pause and Lindquist's careful eyes and the particular line she had been walking for weeks. She was still thinking about it when Damien knocked on her door at 7. She had not known he was coming. She opened the door, and he was standing in the hallway. No suit jacket tonight, just a dark shirt with the collar open, looking more tired than she had seen him. And in the tiredness, something more accessible than usual, something less constructed. I should have told you about your sister, he said. I keep deciding what you can handle, and that's not... He stopped. That's not what this should be. She looked at him. No, she said. It's not. I'm sorry. 2 words, unadorned. She had been given many more elaborate apologies in her life that had meant considerably less. She stepped back from the door. He came inside. She closed it behind him. They stood in her apartment in the ordinary light of a Thursday evening, and the distance between them, which had been maintained carefully and deliberately for weeks, was now close enough that she could see the specific tiredness around his eyes, the scar at his jaw in detail, the particular quality of a man who was usually held very carefully inside himself, and who was, tonight, held slightly less carefully. She reached up and put her hand against his jaw. He went absolutely still. You have to stop deciding things without me, she said quietly. I know, he said. His voice had changed, quieter, something under the control of it that she could hear clearly now. I mean it. I know you do. His hand came up and covered hers where it rested against his face, not moving it away, just holding it there. His eyes were on hers. I heard you. She was not a person who made decisions like this quickly. She had spent 2 years learning to distrust her own impulses, to examine them, to interrogate their origins. She did all of that now, in the space of a breath, and at the end of it she found that what she was feeling was not the hollow urgency of someone seeking comfort, or the misdirected need of someone who had confused protection with affection. It was something quieter and more specific than that, harder to explain, harder to walk back from. She kissed him. It was not tentative. He was not surprised. Or if he was, the surprise lasted less than a second before his hand moved from hers to the side of her face, and he kissed her back with the same directness that characterized everything about him. And it was nothing like the smooth inevitabilities of stories she'd read or films she'd seen. It was human and slightly imperfect and completely real. And when they separated, she felt the specific vertigo of someone who has just stepped off a ledge and discovered the ground was closer than expected. He rested his forehead against hers for a moment. Once I let you in, he said quietly, I need you to understand that I don't do this halfway. I know, she said. She did know. She had understood this about him from the first conversation. My world is... I know what your world is, she said. I've been paying attention. He pulled back enough to look at her. Something in his face, the architecture of it, all those carefully maintained planes, had softened in a way she thought probably very few people had ever seen. It made him look, briefly, more like someone who had once been simply a person before the world had built all these defenses around him. Okay, he said, just that. She made coffee. He stayed. They sat at her kitchen table and talked until midnight, and it was, she would think later, the most ordinary, extraordinary evening of her life. This man who ran things she couldn't fully name, sitting in her kitchen talking about small things, the coffee too strong, an argument about a film they had apparently both seen and disagreed about, the sound of the city outside her window doing its ordinary work. She was happy. She noticed it the way you notice something unexpected, with a slight surprise, a slight suspension of the moment. She let herself feel it rather than examining it immediately. She had been doing that more lately, letting herself feel things rather than translating them instantly into analysis. She was happy and she knew it was fragile and she let it be both things. She did not know. Neither of them knew, because neither of them had yet encountered the specific thing that was coming, that the evening was the last genuinely quiet one either of them would have for a long time. She did not know about the phone call Travis Cole had made from the facility 3 days earlier. The call that had not been to Carver, the call that had gone to someone else entirely, someone who occupied a different register of the same world Damien inhabited. Someone whose specific relationship to Damien was not a history of territorial dispute, but something older and more personal and considerably more dangerous than anything Travis Cole had managed to construct on his own. Someone whose name Damien would have recognized immediately, if he had known it was being spoken. He didn't know yet. He found out on a Friday. Wow. The call came to Damien's private line at 6:48 in the morning, 3 days after the evening in Evelyn's kitchen, 3 days into what had been, against every reasonable expectation, something almost resembling normal. Evelyn had gone to work. He had gone to his. They had spoken twice each day, briefly and practically, and once. On Thursday evening, not practically at all, for 40 minutes about nothing that mattered and everything that did. I was in the back of the sedan heading to a logistics meeting when the number appeared on his phone screen. He looked at it for one full second before answering, because the number was one he had not seen in 4 years, and the sight of it produced something in his chest that was not quite any emotion he had a clean word for. Vescari, the voice said. Male, older, the particular cadence of someone who had never needed to perform authority because authority had simply accumulated around him over decades, the way sediment accumulated at the bottom of a river. Dense, settled, immovable. Reyes, Damien said. The name was Marco Reyes. He was 61 years old, and he had been, for the better part of 20 years, the closest thing that the western half of the city's operational structure had to an architect. Not loud, not visible. The kind of man whose name appeared in conversations rather than headlines, whose presence was felt through outcomes rather than actions. Damien had known him since he was 26, had worked under his umbrella for 3 of those years, had separated from that arrangement professionally and without particular animosity. 7 years ago, when the directions they were moving had stopped being compatible, the separation had been clean. That was what made the call wrong. I'm hearing things, Reyes said, about a situation involving someone in your personal life. Damien said nothing. He looked out the sedan window at the city moving past. He waited. Travis Cole, Reyes said. His attorney reached out to someone I know, looking for resources, leverage. A pause. I turned it down. I want you to know that. I appreciate that, Damien said carefully. Why are you calling to tell me? A pause on the other end, the specific pause of someone deciding how much of a thing to say. Because Cole's attorney didn't stop at me, Reyes said, and the next person they reached has less reason than I do to extend you professional courtesy. Damien's hand tightened on the phone. Who? He said. Reyes said a name. The name was Vincent Caro. Damien sat with it for 3 seconds. 3 seconds during which the sedan continued moving through morning traffic with complete indifference to the temperature change inside it. He thought about Vincent Caro with the specific focused quality of a man who has been in a room with a particular type of danger before and knows exactly what it looks like. Vincent Caro was not Carver. Carver had been a territorial dispute, a financial pressure point, a man whose continued participation could be made too expensive to sustain. Carver operated on arithmetic. Vincent Caro operated on something older than arithmetic. I was 53. He had known Damien's name for 12 years. Their history was not territorial. It was personal in a way that territory could never fully be. Rooted in a specific incident from 8 years ago involving a man named Doyle who had worked for Caro and who had done something that Damien had responded to, and the response had cost Caro something he had not forgotten and had not apparently finished accounting for. When did the contact happen? Damien said. 3 days ago, Reyes said. The attorney pitched it as a straightforward acquisition of information. Caro's people would locate pressure points, apply them to the woman and to you. Create enough disruption to destabilize whatever case the DA's office was building. A pause. Caro accepted. 3 days ago. Damien thought about the last 3 days. The logistics meeting this morning. Tuesday evening, the conversation at Evelyn's kitchen table. Wednesday, The brief calls, the ordinary texture of something new and carefully maintained. 3 days during which he had believed Carver was handled, and the situation was de-escalating, during which he had allowed himself to exist inside something that felt, tentatively and cautiously, like a future. 3 days during which Vincent Caro had been building something. How far along is it? Damien said. I don't know the operational details, Reyes said. I know he accepted. I know he has resources your woman doesn't have countermeasures for. Another pause. I'm calling you because what happened with Doyle was between men who made choices in a world that works a certain way. Whatever this woman did, she didn't make those choices. She doesn't belong in it. No, Damien said. She doesn't. Then you have a problem to solve quickly, Reyes said. And Vescari. The old man's voice carried something almost like warning and almost like something else. Caro isn't Carver. You can't price him out of this. I know what Caro is, Damien said. The call ended. He looked at his phone for 2 seconds. Then he called his second-in-command, a man named Garrett, who had been with him for 9 years and who answered the way he always answered, immediately, with the quality of someone who was already in motion. Caro, Damien said, I need everything current. Locations, operations, who he has active right now. I need it in an hour. Garrett's pause was exactly 1 second long. Vincent Caro. Yes. Another second. Understood. 1 hour. Damien ended the call. He looked out the window at the city. He thought about Evelyn in her office on the 14th floor of the Aldrich Tower building, presenting campaigns to clients with her particular focused efficiency, completely unaware. He picked up the phone again. She answered on the third ring. Good morning, she said. Her voice had the quality it had taken on in the last 3 days, open in a way it hadn't been in the early weeks. He had noticed every increment of that opening. Something's changed, he said. I need to tell you now, before the day gets further along. The openness in her voice shifted to something more alert. Tell me, he told her. Everything. Reyes's call, Caro's name, the history with Doyle that had made Caro a different category of problem. He told her with the completeness he had promised her, and the directness that was, he understood now, the only thing she was going to be able to sustain her trust on. Not managed information, not shaped disclosure, but the actual thing. She was quiet for a moment when he finished. So there's someone who has a personal reason to hurt you, she said. And Travis gave him a professional reason on top of it. Yes. And you can't buy him off. No. Another beat. So what do we do? We. He registered that word specifically and deliberately, the way you registered things that mattered. I'm going to find him before he gets organized, Damien said. That's the only move that makes sense. And me? I'm sending someone to your building, someone you've met. He'll stay close until this is resolved. How long will that take? I don't know, he said, because he had told her he would tell her the hard things, and this was a hard thing. It depends on what Garrett finds. It depends on how far along Caro's planning is. She breathed. He could hear it, that specific controlled breath that meant she was managing something and managing it well. Okay, she said. Keep me informed. I will, he said. Damien. Her voice had changed again, something quieter in it, more specific. Be careful. He paused. I will. He ended the call and looked out the window and thought that careful was the right intention and that Caro had never particularly shared it. Garrett's intelligence arrived in 53 minutes. Damien was back at the harbor building by then, standing at the windows with a black coffee he wasn't drinking, watching the water. Garrett came in without knocking. He had never knocked, and put a folder on the table and stood back and let Damien read it. Vincent Caro was currently operating out of 2 locations, a legitimate import business in the warehouse district that had served as his base for the better part of a decade, and a secondary location in a converted residential building on Marsh Street in the northern quarter. Newer, less documented, identified by Garrett's source through a series of financial traces that had taken most of the last hour to follow. He had 4 people currently active in Creston. 2 Damien recognized by name. 2 he didn't, which was the more concerning category. His contact with Travis Cole's attorney, Damien said. What was the specific deliverable? Best intelligence is that it was a 2-stage arrangement, Garrett said. He had the manner of someone reporting information rather than interpreting it. Precise, stripped of effect, reliable. Stage 1 was what happened with the third complainant, Getting her to withdraw. That's done. Stage 2 is the woman directly. Damien looked up from the folder. Define directly, he said. No specific method confirmed. The intelligence is that stage 2 is intended to be visible enough to send a message to you rather than just to her. A pause. Caro's framing this as unfinished business with you. Cole's situation is the vehicle, not the purpose. Damien closed the folder. The thing about Vincent Caro, the thing Damien had always understood about him, and had been careful to maintain enough distance from that it stayed theoretical, was that he did not operate with the financial logic that governed most people in their world. Most people, when the cost exceeded the return, recalculated. Caro had a different variable in his equation. He operated on the logic of demonstration. What he did visibly, and he did it thoroughly, because his business was built on the belief, the demonstrated, documented belief, that crossing him had a specific and reliable consequence. The incident with Doyle, 8 years ago. Doyle had worked for Caro and had been involved in an operation that had touched Damien's business in a way that required a response. Damien had responded. The response had been measured, costly to Caro, but contained, and Damien had considered it closed. Caro had considered it an insult that had been accumulating interest. Now Travis Cole had handed him a vehicle for collection. The Marsh Street location, Damien said. How current is this? As of last night. The source is reliable. Damien turned from the window. I need 4 people. Not Garrett's usual team, specific people. He named them. Garrett wrote nothing down. He had the kind of memory that made writing unnecessary. We move tonight, not tomorrow, not in 2 days. Tonight, before Caro moves to stage 2. Tonight is fast. Tonight is necessary, Damien said. What do you need from me to make it happen? Garrett looked at him steadily. In 9 years they had been in fast situations before, situations that required compression of planning timelines that other people would have considered inadequate. Garrett's assessment of those situations had always been accurate. 3 hours to stage it correctly, Garrett said. Move at 11. Done, Damien said. Garrett left. Damien stood in his apartment and thought about Evelyn in her office, about the 3 days of something almost like ordinary, about a kitchen table conversation and a film they disagreed about, and the specific sound of her laugh when she thought something was actually funny, rather than when she was being politely responsive. He thought about Lena, about 40 minutes and what 40 minutes meant, and had always meant. He picked up his phone. He texted Evelyn, still on for this. Situation requires movement tonight. The man outside your building is named Saul. He has a photograph of you and you have a description of him. Don't go anywhere without him until I contact you. Her reply came in 4 minutes. Understood. He better be able to keep up. He almost smiled. Almost. The problem with moving fast was that other people could also move fast. Damien understood this in the abstract. He had simply miscalculated how fast, specifically, Caro had already moved. He found out at 8:40 p.m., 2 hours before the planned 11 o'clock, when Saul called his phone with a quality in his voice that Damien had heard from Saul twice before in 9 years, and that meant the situation had changed. She's gone, Saul said. The 2 words hit him like a physical impact, a shock to the chest, sudden and concrete. Explain, Damien said. His voice was completely flat. She left the building at 7:20. She said she was going 2 blocks to a pharmacy. I was with her, 10 feet back, maintaining distance per protocol. On the return trip, between the pharmacy and her building, there's a service alley between the dry cleaner and the Vietnamese restaurant on Collister. 2 men. It was fast, Damien. It was under 12 seconds. A vehicle, side door open. I got there in time to see the plate, but not... Saul's voice was doing something it almost never did. Something tight and compressed, and the sound of a man who was very controlled and very angry at himself. Not in time to stop it. Damien had already moved to the table where the folder was. Plate. Saul gave it. Damien handed it to Garrett, who had appeared in the doorway. Garrett was already on another phone. She fought, Saul said. I want you to know that. She got one of them in the face. There was... A pause. There was blood on the sidewalk that wasn't hers. Damien stood in his apartment and breathed for exactly 3 seconds, with the particular controlled quality of a man who had trained himself over many years to process things that required processing, without letting the processing become the loudest thing in the room. And in those 3 seconds he felt something that he had not allowed himself to feel in a very long time. something raw and located and completely specific. Then he picked up his keys. The Marsh Street location, he said to Garrett. That's where he'll take her. He wants this to be visible. He needs a location he controls. He moved toward the door. Change of plan. We move now. The people aren't staged yet. Then we go with what we have. He stopped in the doorway. Garrett. His voice was very level. She is not Lena. Do you understand me? I am not going to be 40 minutes late to this. Garrett held his gaze for 1 second. I've got 3 people who can be at Marsh Street in 20 minutes, he said. Then make the calls, Damien said. Right now. The building on Marsh Street had been a residential hotel in a previous life. 6 stories of narrow windows and brick that had gone dark sometime in the middle of the last decade. Its lobby locked and lightless to the street, its upper floors a grid of empty rooms that had been converted, over time, to Caro's particular purposes. It occupied the corner of Marsh and a side street that dead-ended at a chain-link fence 50 feet to the north, which meant 1 primary vehicle entrance and 1 pedestrian exit, and the kind of geography that was good for privacy and not good for rapid egress. Damien had been inside it once, 8 years ago, when the relationship between him and Caro had still been something that admitted of civil meetings. He remembered the layout with the fidelity of someone who had always paid that kind of attention to buildings as a matter of basic survival. They arrived in 2 vehicles, Damien with Sol in the first, Garrett with the other 3 in the second, parking on the dead-end side street with the lights off at 9:17 p.m. The night was cold and clear with the particular clarity of a city night in late autumn when the humidity had dropped and every surface was sharp-edged and specific. Damien sat in the dark car and looked at the building for 30 seconds. The 3rd floor had light and 2 windows. The rest of the building was dark. She's been in there 40 minutes, he said. Sol said nothing. He was checking something at his jacket. His face in the dark was set with a specific expression, not remorse exactly, because Sol did not operate on remorse, but accountability, the particular focused quality of a man who had made an error and was now in the process of correcting it. 3rd floor, Damien said. That's my read too, Sol said. Caro will be there personally. This is a demonstration. He doesn't delegate those. He paused. The 2 men who took her. Either of them capable of making complex decisions on their own? No, Sol said. Both of them were running a script. Then they'll defer to Caro, which means when I'm in the room with Caro, they'll wait for his signal before they do anything. He looked at Sol. That's the window. That's a narrow window. Yes, Damien said. It is. He reached for the door handle. Damien, Sol's voice, rare, that use of his name rather than nothing. She was calm when they took her, I want you to know that. She didn't freeze. She was already working the problem. He sat with that for 1 second. He got out of the car. The service entrance on the north side of the building had a lock that yielded to specific knowledge of its mechanism rather than to force. And Damien had that knowledge because he had come through this entrance 8 years ago, and some things stayed in memory with complete fidelity, regardless of what else you forgot. The stairwell was dark and smelled of old concrete and something chemical, and they moved through it with the minimal necessary light and the minimal necessary sound, which in practice meant almost none of either. 3rd floor landing. The door to the hallway had a gap at the bottom where the light from the corridor came through. Damien could hear voices, 2 distinct, 1 continuous, and 1 responding in shorter intervals. He listened to the cadence for 15 seconds and identified the continuous one as coming from the far end of the hall, past 2 doors, the corner room. He held up 2 fingers to Sol. Sol nodded. Then Damien heard a 3rd voice, a woman's voice, not frightened, not pleading, clear and hard and carrying through the old building's walls with the precision of someone who was choosing every word with care. You want to send Damien a message, Evelyn said, her voice coming through the wall with a steadiness that stopped him cold in the stairwell. Fine, then send it, but understand something first. Whatever you think you're accomplishing tonight, you're not hurting him. You're giving him a reason, a pause. Then Caro's voice, older, unhurried, with the dangerous calm of someone who believed he was already inside the outcome he wanted. A reason, Caro said. To finish this, she said, completely. You know what he's capable of, and you're handing him the justification to use it. Is that actually what you want? Sol looked at Damien in the dark of the stairwell. Damien looked at the door. He put his hand on it. He pushed. The hallway was narrow and fluorescent lit, and at the far end, in the corner room with the door open, Vincent Caro stood facing the room's interior with two men positioned to either side. And Evelyn sat in a chair against the far wall with her wrists bound behind her and a cut above her left eyebrow that had bled down her cheek and dried there. And she was looking at Caro with the specific expression of a woman who had been assessing the room for 40 minutes and had not stopped. She saw Damien in the doorway behind Caro before Caro did. She did not react. She held his gaze for exactly 1 second. Then she looked back at Caro and said, "Think very carefully about what happens next." Caro turned. It was not a man who startled. Damien had known that about him for 12 years, and it remained true now. The turn was controlled, deliberate, the movement of someone who had assessed the sound of footsteps in a hallway and had already incorporated the new information before completing the motion. He was tall and lean, with white hair cut close to his skull, and the particular face of a man whose expressions had been reduced over decades to their most functional minimum. He wore a dark coat over a dark shirt, and he looked at Damien in the doorway with something that was not surprise and not fear, but a species of calculation that had, at its edges, something almost like satisfaction. "Vescari," he said. Same cadence as Reyes had used on the phone that morning. "A name," said the way you said something you had been thinking about for a long time. Damien did not look at Evelyn. He looked at Caro. He looked at the two men positioned to either side of the room. The one to the left closer to the window, the one to the right closer to Evelyn's chair. And he processed the geometry of it with the same flat speed he had always processed rooms, cataloging distances and angles, and the specific quality of each man's readiness. Saul came through the door behind him. In the same moment, Garrett and the other three entered from a second door at the far end of the hall that Damien had known was there from 8 years of memory. The geometry changed. The man to the right of Evelyn looked at the door behind him and looked at Saul and looked at Caro and did the calculation that his particular brain was capable of doing. His hands moved away from his body, not raised, not surrendered, but relocated to a position of non-commitment, waiting for Caro's signal. The man to the left did the same. Caro looked at Damien. "You moved fast," Caro said. "I had reason to," Damien said. "She's not hurt." He said it without particular feeling, not as reassurance, as information. A man reporting a status. "She has blood on her face," Damien said. "That was the acquisition, not intentional." A pause. "My people were instructed to be clean about it." "Then your people need better instruction," Damien said. The room held its specific tension. 7 people in a narrow space with the particular quality of a situation that had not yet resolved its direction and in which every person present was aware that the resolution, when it came, would be permanent in some way that the current moment was not. Evelyn's voice came from the chair. "Can someone untie my hands?" she said. Not to Caro. To the room in general, with a flat practical irritation that cut through the tension the way something completely unperformative sometimes did. Nobody moved for 2 seconds. Then Damien said, "Saul." Saul crossed to her. The man to her right watched Saul cross the room and did not move. Saul produced a knife. Not dramatically, functionally, and cut the binding at her wrists. Evelyn brought her arms forward and pressed both hands against her thighs, and her jaw tightened at the return of circulation, and she breathed through it without making a sound. Damien watched her do that. He let himself look at her for exactly the 3 seconds that Saul was behind her. And in those 3 seconds he saw the cut above her eyebrow, and the dried blood on her cheek, and the absolute specific steadiness in her eyes when they found his, and something in him that had been running very hot for the last hour settled into something more controlled and considerably more dangerous. He looked back at Caro. "Here's what's going to happen," Damien said. His voice had the quality of something that had been stripped down to its functional core. No performance, no inflation, just the accurate statement of a thing that was going to occur. "You're going to release any claim on this situation. The arrangement with Travis Cole ends tonight. Whatever you understood the deliverable to be, you're going to understand it differently, starting now." Caro looked at him. The calculation in his face was still running. "And the matter of Doyle," Caro said. "Is settled," Damien said. "Has been settled for 8 years. You know what Doyle did. You know why I responded. You've been carrying this because you decided the response was disproportionate. I'm telling you now that it wasn't. It was exactly proportionate to what your man did. And if you'd done the same accounting at the time, you would have reached the same conclusion. Something moved in Caro's face. Not agreement. The particular expression of a man who has held a grievance long enough that releasing it requires the acknowledgement of the holding rather than the resolution of the original dispute. He worked for me, Caro said. I know he did, Damien said. And what he did while working for you, which means that whatever he brought down on himself, he brought down on your operation by extension. I handled it cleanly. I didn't advertise it. I didn't use it. I settled it, and I kept it between us. A pause. That was a courtesy, Caro. You've been treating it as an offense for 8 years. The room was very still. You want me to call it a courtesy, Caro said. I want you to call it what it was, Damien said. A man who worked for you put hands on a woman who was under my protection and then lied about it. I found out. I responded. That's the complete accounting. Something shifted in Caro's face. It was not the shift of a man who was changing his mind. It was the shift of a man who had been maintaining a position for so long that he had partly lost track of the original reasoning and was now, for the first time in some years, being asked to look at the original reasoning directly. The silence stretched. Evelyn stood up from the chair. She did it without asking and without announcement, simply rising, and the two men in the room tracked the movement but did not respond to it because the room's specific authority structure had shifted, and they understood that. She walked to stand beside Damien, not behind him, beside him. He felt the specific heat of her presence next to him, and did not look at her but was completely aware of her, the way you were aware of something you had decided to protect with the entirety of what you were. Caro looked at the two of them. The coal arrangement, he said. Ends tonight, Damien said. Whatever you've been paid, keep it. Consider it the final accounting on Doyle, if that's how you need to frame it. But it ends here, and it ends completely, and your people stay away from her family, from anyone connected to her, from this point forward. Another silence. Caro was looking at Damien with the particular look of a man assessing not the present moment but the trajectory, calculating not what was true now, but what would be true in a year, in 5 years, in the sustained geography of a world they both occupied and would continue to occupy. You'd let me walk out of here, Caro said. I'd let you walk out of here, Damien confirmed. With a clear understanding of where we stand, Caro looked at Evelyn. It was the first time he had looked at her directly since Damien had entered the room, and what he found there. She held his gaze with the specific quality of someone who had been in this room for 40 minutes and had not once stopped thinking, seemed to inform his final calculation in some way that Damien couldn't entirely read. Clear understanding, Caro said. Yes, Damien said. Caro buttoned his coat. He walked to the door. His two men followed. At the threshold he stopped without turning. Vescari, he said. Caro, Damien said. A pause. Then the old man walked out, and his footsteps receded down the hallway, and the building exhaled its specific silence back into the room. In the car on the way back across the city, Evelyn sat in the back seat beside Damien and did not speak for several minutes. He did not try to fill the silence. He had learned early what her silences were for. She was holding a cloth that Saul had provided against the cut above her eyebrow. The bleeding had mostly stopped, in the intermittent light of the passing street lamps. Her face was pale and specific and carrying the particular exhaustion of someone who had been running on sustained adrenaline for several hours and whose body was beginning to present the bill. He wasn't going to hurt me, she said finally. Not tonight. He wanted you to come for me. That was the point. I know, Damien said. He underestimated how fast you'd move. She looked out the window. And he underestimated me, a little. I bought maybe 20 minutes with the talking. A pause. I didn't know if it would be enough. It was enough, he said. She turned to look at him. In the car's interior shadows, she looked very real. Not the composed presentation of the professional woman he had met in a parking garage. Not the careful negotiation of a person rebuilding themselves, but the specific human reality of someone who had been frightened and had not let the fear make her decisions for her. You came through the back entrance, she said. I've been in that building before. I know. I figured that out while I was sitting there. She lowered the cloth from her eyebrow. I kept thinking, he knows this building. If he comes, he'll know how to come. A pause. I kept thinking that. He looked at her. He thought about what Saul had said. She didn't freeze. She was already working the problem. And he thought about the specific quality of the voice he had heard through the wall in the hallway, clear and steady, and choosing every word, buying time not with panic but with intelligence. You were talking him into a delay, Damien said. I was talking him into thinking he was in control of the conversation, she said. There's a difference. She almost smiled. It didn't quite make it, but the shape of it was there. I spent a lot of years learning how to talk to men who needed to feel like they were in control. He reached over and took her hand. She laced her fingers through his with the ease of something that had stopped needing to be considered. The cut needs looking at, he said. I know. Tonight. I know, Damien. He didn't push further. He held her hand and looked out at the city, and the city continued its indifferent work, all those lit windows and moving vehicles, and the accumulated ordinary business of several million people living their lives, and somewhere in a holding facility on the other side of it. Travis Cole was sleeping or not sleeping in a cell, and Vincent Caro was moving through the night toward whatever recalculation the last hour had required of him, and Evelyn's hand was in his, and her pulse was elevated but steadying, and they crossed the Callister Bridge with the river dark below them, and the city spread out on the other side, and Damien thought about Lena in the specific way that he sometimes thought about her, not with the sharp grief of the early years, but with the older and more settled quality of someone carried rather than lost, present in the architecture of who you had become. He had not been 40 minutes late tonight. He held on to that. The hospital visit took 2 hours. The cut required 4 stitches from a calm and efficient doctor who did not ask many questions, which was either professional discretion or the specific quality of an emergency room at midnight on a Friday, when the volume of not quite right situations was high enough that one more barely registered. Evelyn sat on the examination table and answered the questions that were asked, and did not flinch when the needle went in and held Damien's gaze across the room, while it happened with an expression that was part defiance and part something more private. He drove her home at 2 in the morning. He came upstairs. She didn't ask him to, and he didn't ask if he should. It simply happened with the naturalness of something that had stopped being a decision and become a fact. She stood at her bathroom mirror, cleaning the dried blood from her cheek, the careful, precise motion of a washcloth, the water going pink, and he stood in the bathroom doorway watching her do it. She met his eyes in the mirror. Say it, she said. Say what? Whatever you've been working up to since the car. He was quiet for a moment. This is going to keep being what it is, he said. My world, the kind of nights it produces. I can manage the exposure, I can reduce it significantly, but I can't make it not exist. She rinsed the washcloth. She looked at herself in the mirror for a moment. The stitches, the slight swelling, the specific face of someone who had passed through something and was looking at what came out the other side. I know that, she said. You should think about whether... Damien. She turned from the mirror. I'm 34 years old. I spent 4 years with a man who was never honest with me about anything, including himself. I spent the last 5 months being afraid in my own apartment, and I spent tonight sitting in a room with a man who intended to use me as a message. She looked at him directly. I know exactly what I'm choosing. I'm not confused about it, and I'm not going to need time to think about it. A pause. But if you ask me one more time whether I've considered it fully, I'm going to ask you to leave. He looked at her. Okay, he said. She crossed the bathroom and stood in front of him and put her hand flat against his chest, against the dark shirt, and felt his heartbeat underneath it, faster than she'd expected. She found that detail unexpectedly important, that under everything, the heart was doing what hearts did. You were scared tonight, she said quietly, when Saul called you. A pause. Yes. Good, she said. That's the correct response. Something in his face shifted. That settling she had seen before. That specific relaxation of something long held. He covered her hand with his where it rested on his chest. I don't scare easily, he said. I know, she said. That's why it matters. The weeks that followed moved differently than the weeks before, not easily. Nothing about the situation resolved easily or completely or without the sustained work of 2 people who had arrived at each other through genuinely difficult circumstances and who were building something inside those circumstances rather than waiting for the circumstances to clear first, but differently. The specific quality of waiting that had characterized the previous months, that sustained anticipatory tension, the constant peripheral vigilance, the sense of a threat that had not yet fully materialized, began, slowly and unevenly, to lift. Travis Cole's trial was set for early spring. The case was strong. The third complainant had reinstated her statement and held it, and Helena Park worked with the prosecution's team with the methodical precision she brought to everything, and the documentation that Evelyn had accumulated over months. Every voicemail, every police report, every building incident, every attorney correspondence, assembled itself into something that a jury would be able to follow from beginning to end without ambiguity. She testified in March. She sat in the witness box on a Tuesday morning in a courtroom that smelled like old wood and floor wax and the specific institutional neutral of a building designed to process difficult things without becoming overwhelmed by them. And she answered the questions her attorney and the prosecution had prepared her for, and she answered the defense attorney's questions too. And she did it with the particular stillness she had developed. Not coldness, not distance, but the quality of someone who had fully inhabited their own experience and was not afraid to have it examined. Travis sat at the defense table and looked at her throughout. She looked back at him exactly twice. Once, when she first took the stand and found his eyes already on her, she met them for 3 seconds and understood in those 3 seconds that the man looking at her had not changed and was not going to change, and that this fact was a fact about him and not a fact about her or anything she had done or failed to do. The second time was at the end of her testimony, when she stood to step down from the box, and she looked at him briefly and directly, and found that what she felt was not triumph and not residual fear, but something closer to a final categorization, the specific completion of understanding a thing fully, setting it in its place, and moving away from it. She walked out of the courtroom. Damien was in the hallway. He had not been in the courtroom. They had discussed it, and she had told him she didn't need him there, that she needed to do that particular thing entirely on her own, and he had heard her and agreed without making it into anything it didn't need to be. He was in the hallway now in the way that he had become, present at the right time, at the right distance, without making the presence into a performance. She stopped in front of him. "How was it?" he said. "It was what it needed to be," she said. "I said what was true." He heard it. She paused. It felt like enough. He looked at her. That complete specific look she had learned to receive, the one that took everything in and confirmed it and asked nothing from it. Then he said, "Lunch." She almost laughed. She did laugh, a short, real thing. "Yes," she said, "lunch." They walked out of the courthouse into a Tuesday in March, cold and overcast. The sky, the particular white of a day that hadn't decided yet whether it was going to do anything. She pulled her coat tighter, and he put his hand at the small of her back, and they walked down the courthouse steps into the ordinary city that had been going about its business regardless. The verdict came 6 weeks later, guilty on all counts. Helena called her at 4 in the afternoon on a Wednesday and said the words, and she sat in her office and heard them, and thanked Helena, and put down the phone and sat for a moment in the specific quality of that particular silence. She did not cry. She had thought she might, and she didn't. What she felt was quieter than crying and more final. The specific sensation of a door closing on something that had been open too long, letting cold air in from a direction that no longer needed to be monitored. She called her sister Claire. Claire cried enough for both of them, which was exactly what Evelyn needed from that phone call, and they talked for an hour about nothing related to Travis or courts or any of it, about Claire's son and his new obsession with a particular type of dinosaur and a restaurant that had opened near Claire's house, and whether their mother's birthday was going to be handled this year with more coordination than last year's complete collapse of planning. Ordinary things. The sustained texture of a life that contained those things. She called Damien after. "It came back," she said. "I know," he said. Garrett heard. Of course he did. She looked out her office window at the city in its late afternoon light. "Are you home tonight?" "I can be." "I'll cook," she said. "Come at 7. "You cook?" he said. "I cook adequately," she said. "Which is more than you do." "I've never claimed to cook. You've never claimed not to either, and I've been waiting for you to reveal the hidden talent." "The hidden talent is not cooking," he said. 7 o'clock, she said, adequately. She heard something in the silence that followed that she had come to know well. The particular quality of him being amused and not saying so. That minimal shift in the texture of his presence on a phone line that she had learned to read the way you learn to read small and reliable things. 7, he said. She put down the phone. She sat at her desk for a moment longer and thought about the specific path of the last several months. The parking garage, and the concrete pillar, and the geometry of a trap, and a voice from the dark that had changed the direction of things. She thought about the paper trail and the police reports and the kitchen table conversation and the corner room on Marsh Street and the courthouse hallway this morning. She thought about what got built from the material of difficult experiences when you chose to build something rather than simply survive the experience and move on. She thought about Lena, who had been 24, and about the 40 minutes that had become the load-bearing structure of a man's entire moral life, and about what it meant that the same grief could be the thing that destroyed you, and the thing that drove you toward every subsequent good act, depending entirely on what you decided to do with it. She thought that most things were like that, actually. The same material, used differently. She went back to work. The dinner was adequate in the specific way she had promised, and he ate it without complaint, and with what she had come to understand was his version of genuine appreciation, which expressed itself not through words but through the particular quality of his attention. The way he set down his phone and didn't pick it back up. The way he looked at her when she was talking about something she cared about. The specific, focused presence of a man who did not perform being interested but simply was. They did the dishes together afterward. He washed and she dried, which was an arrangement they had arrived at through the simple efficiency of him having started washing before she could form a preference, and which had become the standard arrangement in the months since with the ease of something that had never required negotiation. "The Westmount dinner," she said. She was drying a bowl and not looking at him. "Claire wants to do a proper introduction, the one we've been postponing." He turned off the water. "When?" he said. "Next Sunday. Her house. She's making her husband's recipe for something I can't pronounce that's apparently a production, and she wants an audience for it." He looked at her. "Does she know what I do?" "She knows what you are," Evelyn said, "which is not entirely the same thing, and she knows what you did." She set the bowl down. "She knows you came through the back entrance of a building in the Harbor District on a Friday night to find me. That was sufficient for Claire." He was quiet for a moment. "Sunday," he said. "Sunday," she confirmed. He turned back to the remaining dishes. She dried. Outside her kitchen window, the city did its Friday night work, all that accumulated motion and noise and light that she had once heard as the indifferent texture of a place that did not know or care what happened inside it, and that she heard now differently, as company, almost. The sound of a great many lives occurring simultaneously in the same space. "Damien," she said. That first night, the garage." She set down the dish towel. "You said you'd told yourself you would always stop, when you saw it." "Yes," he said. "Did you know it was going to be complicated?" she said. "When you stepped out? Did you understand what you were walking into?" He thought about it. She appreciated that he thought about it rather than answering immediately. "I understood there was a man who needed to be stopped," he said. "That's all I understood. Everything after that—" He paused. Everything after that was its own thing. She looked at the side of his face, the scar at his jaw, the smaller one above his eyebrow, the specific face of a man assembled from difficult material who had done something with it that was complicated and not always clean, and in its own way completely committed. "I'm glad you stepped out," she said. He turned and looked at her. In the kitchen light he looked, she searched for the word and found it, real. Completely and specifically real, without any of the performance of anything. "So am I," he said. She picked up the dish towel and handed it to him. "There are 3 more," she said. He dried them. Go. The evening she would remember most clearly from that entire year was not the parking garage, and not the courthouse hallway, and not Marsh Street, though all of those had their permanent places in the architecture of who she was becoming. The evening she would remember was much quieter than any of those. It was in May, several weeks after the verdict, on a Saturday when neither of them had anything urgent to manage. They had walked, which was something they had taken to doing in the evenings when the weather allowed. Not with any particular destination, just through whatever neighborhood they found themselves in, at the unhurried pace of people who had stopped being in a hurry at each other and were simply present. They ended up on the pedestrian walkway above the old rail yard on the east side of the city, a stretch of elevated park that had been built on converted infrastructure, and that looked out over the Harbor District to the south, and the grid of lit streets spreading north. It was past 9, and the sky had gone that particular deep blue that wasn't quite dark, the last of the light still holding at the edges of the western horizon. She leaned on the railing. He stood beside her. They had been quiet for a few minutes in the way they were, sometimes quiet. Not the silence of nothing to say, but the silence of not needing to say anything, which was a specific and comfortable thing that she had not expected to arrive at so quickly with another person, and that she had stopped examining and simply accepted. What would she have been like? Evelyn said. She did not need to specify who. Lena, what was she like? I was quiet for a moment. Loud, he said. She was loud in the way that some people are just constitutionally loud, not because they're trying to fill space, but because everything they felt went directly into their voice. She laughed too hard at things. She had opinions about everything and was wrong about most of them, but completely committed. A pause. She used to call me when she was driving and just talk at me for 20 minutes about whatever she was thinking about. She never said goodbye, she just stopped talking and hung up. A longer pause. I used to pretend to be annoyed by it. Evelyn listened. She did not fill any of the pauses. She would have been impossible about you, he said. She would have found out everything and had a comprehensive opinion within the first 15 minutes. And she would have told you directly, and she would have been embarrassing about it. Another pause. She would have liked you. She had a specific appreciation for people who didn't pretend to be less than they were. Evelyn looked out at the harbor, at the dark water, and the reflected city lights scattered across it. I think I would have liked her too, she said. He said nothing, but he moved slightly closer to her at the railing, not much, an inch or two, and she felt it and leaned into it slightly in return. They stood there as the sky finished its transition from deep blue to black, and the city's lights came fully into their own, and the harbor moved its slow dark water below them, patient and indifferent and entirely beautiful. She thought about things getting built from difficult material. She thought about what it meant to choose each other in full knowledge of what the choice contained, not despite the difficulty of it, but including it, understanding it as part of the material rather than something to be resolved before the real thing could begin. The real thing had already begun. It had begun in a concrete parking garage at 12:17 in the morning, when a voice had come from the dark with no need to raise itself, and it had continued through every complicated and frightening and occasionally beautiful thing that had followed, and it was here now on this walkway above an old rail yard on a May evening, with the city lit up below them and the harbor beyond. She turned to him. He was already looking at her. She knew, in the specific way that you knew the things that had stopped being theoretical and become simply true, that this was not a rescue story. She had not been saved. She had been accompanied, through a portion of a life that had required accompanying, by a man who had his own reasons and his own losses and his own particular way of moving through the world. And together they had navigated a situation that neither of them would have chosen, but that had produced, in its navigation, something neither of them had anticipated. That was what it was. Not simple, not without cost, not clean in the way that easier things were clean, but real, completely and specifically real, in the way that only things earned through actual difficulty ever were. She reached up and touched the scar at his jaw, briefly and gently. He caught her hand and held it. The city moved and glittered below them. Neither of them said anything. It was enough.